Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations, attacks, and unforeseen dangers that plague us today here in the 21st century. Tonight, we're going to follow up from last week's video, where we began discussing content from the book People of the Lie, The Hope for Healing Human Evil by Dr. M. Scott Peck. In last week's video, we spent some time reading through the initial chapters defining what Peck means by the phrase people of the lie, as well as making some important distinctions regarding sin and those who Peck has described as evil. Peck's main assertion is that it's not accurate to characterize people as evil simply due to the fact that they commit sins. Sinning, broadly speaking, means missing the mark, to fail at being continually perfect, and every single person on earth falls into this multiple times every single day. In Peck's words, evil deeds do not an evil person make, otherwise we should all be evil, because we all do evil things. We routinely fail to do the very best of which we are capable, and with each failure we commit a crime of sorts against God, our neighbors, or ourselves. This truth has been the state of humanity ever since the fall, when the serpent deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden. Our choices, when led and driven by our own will and the desires of our hearts, tend towards sin and wickedness always. It is in the very nature of us serving our will over the will of the Most High that we can know this to be true. To go against the living God is no small matter. We will get into the meaning of that at some point in the near future, but for now it will be helpful for everyone watching to consider what it really means to think that you have better plans or ideas than a completely perfect being. Now, that should get some thoughts moving about the truth of our desperate need for Jesus and His love, grace, and mercy. For Peck, the distinction of evil is made when we encounter the consistent and unrepentant nature of the sins that are being committed. Peck defines the evil by noting the consistency of their sins. While usually subtle, their destructiveness is remarkably consistent. This is because those who have crossed over the line are characterized by their absolute refusal to tolerate the sense of their own sinfulness. This denial of the truth speaks directly to what I just mentioned about those who would willingly and knowingly go against the will of the living God. They would necessarily be the same kinds of people who are unwilling to undergo any level of serious self-examination. This defense mechanism, however it was born and developed, ensures further and further deepening of their own delusions about the truth of who they are and how they live, think, and behave. The evil will not tolerate the light of truth being shown on their impact on the world around them. This is exactly why this channel was created, in order to guard ourselves against evil and seek the truth, no matter how painful or difficult it may be to discern. We all need to take ourselves to the cross in this respect. Picking up where we left off in People of the Lie. When describing the core problem of those he has termed evil, Peck writes, "The problem is not a defect of conscience, but the effort to deny the conscience its due. We become evil by attempting to hide from ourselves. The wickedness of the evil is not committed directly, but indirectly as a part of this cover-up process. Evil originates not in the absence of guilt, but in the effort to escape it. It often happens then that the evil may be recognized by its very disguise. The lie can be perceived before the misdeed it is designed to hide, the cover-up before the fact. We see the smile that hides the hatred, the smooth and oily manner that masks the fury, the velvet glove that covers the fist. Because they are such experts at disguise, it is seldom possible to pinpoint the maliciousness of the evil. The disguise is usually impenetrable. Since they will do almost anything to avoid the particular pain that comes from self-examination, under ordinary circumstances, the evil are the last people who would ever come to psychotherapy. The evil hate the light of goodness that shows them up, the light of scrutiny that exposes them, the light of truth that penetrates their deception. What this highlights is that there is a choice in the matter. We are free will beings, and no matter what level of trauma or defense mechanisms may be triggering and driving our behavior, we, at some level, make the choice to behave in any X or Y manner. Often, the people of the lie have some sense that they are the cause of a great deal of pain in their lives, which stems directly from their choices. The self-serving motives always win out in the evil, which is why they will avoid at all costs the kinds of self-examination that would lead to healing. This leads Dr. Peck to ask, if the central defect of the evil is not one of conscience, then where does it reside? The essential psychological problem of human evil, I believe, is a particular variety of narcissism. As we have discussed, we can't paint every person as evil for simply behaving narcissistically from time to time. We've discussed the qualities and the qualifications of those who are diagnosable narcissists. To take things a bit further, Peck draws on the work of Erich Fromm by examining pathological, malignant narcissism. He writes, "Malignant narcissism is characterized by an unsubmitted will. All adults who are mentally healthy submit themselves one way or another to something higher than themselves, be it God or truth or love or some other ideal. They do what God wants them to do rather than what they would desire. Thy will, not mine, be done, the God-submitted person says. They believe in what is true rather than what they would like to be true. What their beloved needs becomes more important to them than their own gratification. In summary, to a greater or lesser degree, all mentally healthy individuals submit themselves to the demands of their own conscience. Not so the evil, however. In the conflict between their guilt and their will, it is the guilt that must go and the will that must win." What we see in the description of malignant narcissists is a tale as old as time. The willful, unrelenting self-aggrandizement of a truly broken and unhealthy person has become so powerful that they will stop at nothing to gain their supply. We see this play out in the story of Cain and Abel to murderous ends. Everyone is in danger of taking things too far in these ways, and just like Cain, we may do a great deal of self-deception to hide the truth of our own willfulness along our own path of destruction. Cain even tries to hide from God, and we all know that none of us can succeed at doing that. Peck writes, "Indeed, it is almost tempting to think that the problem of evil lies in the will itself. Perhaps the evil are so inherently strong-willed that it is impossible for them ever to submit their will. Yet I think it is characteristic of all great people that they are extremely strong-willed, whether their greatness be for good or for evil. The strong will, the power and authority of Jesus radiates from the Gospels, just as Hitler's did from Mein Kampf. But Jesus' will was that of his Father, and Hitler's that of his own. The crucial distinction is between willingness and willfulness. Pride goeth before the fall, it is said. And of course, laymen simply call pride what we have labeled with the fancy psychiatric term of malignant narcissism. Being at the very root of evil, it is no accident that church authorities have generally considered pride first among the sins. By the sin of pride, they do not generally mean the sense of legitimate achievement that one might enjoy after a job well done. While such pride, like normal narcissism, may have its pitfalls, it is also part of healthy self-confidence and a realistic sense of self-worth. We've spoken about this in the need to contextualize ourselves. What is meant, rather, is a kind of pride that unrealistically denies our inherent sinfulness and imperfection, a kind of overweening pride or arrogance that prompts people to reject and even attack the judgment implied by the day-to-day evidence of their own inadequacy. The malignantly narcissistic insist upon affirmation independent of all findings. When People of the Lie was first published, the body of work on narcissism was still very much growing, and more was being understood about the degrees and likely causes of these kinds of behavior in people. We know much more now, but even then, Peck was spot on in his assertions about the core problem that exists in the things that would classify a person as evil. What is the cause of this overweening pride, this self-arrogant image of perfection, this particularly malignant type of narcissism? Why does it afflict a few when most seem to escape its clutches? We do not know. In the past 15 years, psychiatrists have begun to pay increasing attention to the phenomenon of narcissism, but our understanding of the subject is still in its infancy. We've not yet succeeded, for instance, in distinguishing the different types of excessive self-absorption. There are many who are clearly, even grossly, narcissistic in one way or another, but are not evil. All I can say at this point is that the particular brand of narcissism that characterizes evil people seems to be one that particularly afflicts the will. Dr. Peck continues, nonetheless, a leading theory of the genesis of pathological narcissism is that it is a defensive phenomenon. Since almost all young children demonstrate a formidable array of narcissistic characteristics, it is assumed that narcissism is something we generally grow out of in the course of normal development, through a stable childhood under the care of loving and understanding parents. If the parents are cruel and unloving, however, or the childhood otherwise traumatic, it is believed that the infantile narcissism will be preserved as a kind of psychological fortress to protect the child against the vicissitudes of its intolerable life. This theory might well apply to the genesis of human evil. The builders of the medieval cathedrals placed upon their buttresses the figures of gargoyles, themselves symbols of evil, in order to ward off the spirits of greater evil. Thus, children may become evil in order to defend themselves against the onslaughts of parents who are evil themselves. It is possible, therefore, to think of human evil, or some of it, as a kind of psychological gargoylism. There are other ways, however, to look at the genesis of human evil. The fact of the matter is that some of us are very good, and some of us very evil, and most of us are somewhere in between. We might therefore think of human good and evil as a kind of continuum. As individuals, we can move ourselves one way or another along the continuum. Just as there is a tendency for the rich to get richer, however, and the poor to get poorer, so there seems to be a tendency for the good to get better and the bad to get worse. Erich Fromm spoke of these matters at some length. Our capacity to choose changes constantly with our practice of life. The longer we continue to make the wrong decisions, the more our heart hardens, and the more often we make the right decision, the more our heart softens, or better perhaps, comes alive. Each step in life which increases my self-confidence, my integrity, my courage, my conviction, also increases my capacity to choose desirable alternatives until eventually it becomes more difficult for me to choose the undesirable rather than the desirable action. On the other hand, each act of surrender and cowardice weakens me, opens the path for more acts of surrender, and eventually freedom is lost. Between the extreme, when I can no longer do a wrong act, and the extreme when I have lost my freedom to right action, there are innumerable degrees of freedom of choice. In the practice of life, the degree of freedom to choose is different at any given moment. If the degree of freedom to choose the good is great, it needs less efforts to choose the good. If it is small, it takes a great effort, help from others, and favorable circumstances. Most people fail in the art of living not because they are inherently bad or so without will that they cannot lead a better life. They fail because they do not wake up and see when they stand at a fork in the road and have to decide. They are not aware when life asks them a question and when they still have alternative answers. Then with each step along the wrong road, it becomes increasingly more difficult for them to admit that they are on the wrong road, often only because they have to admit that they must go back to the first wrong turn and accept the fact that they have wasted energy and time. Now, there's a great deal to examine in these words, and we'll pick up next week by tying some of these things to the growing normalization of these behaviors, ultimately leading to a cultural acceptance and promotion of evil as being a good thing in today's world. Give some thought to what we've read here. Apply it to yourself, examine your day-to-day behavior, and see if you fall victim or prey to any of these defense mechanisms or lack of taking ownership of the responsibility to choose good over evil in your day-to-day life. Examine your choices and let the truth of whose will you serve be the thing that draws you closer to Jesus. His will be done above all others. Until next time, stay safe, stay diligent and vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.